Hey guys, Kaylee Jane here with Seaverman's Farm. I realize it looks from these videos like all I ever do is walk around in nature with my goats, but I actually do a lot of other stuff as well, but I tend to mostly film when I'm out here walking with them, principally because this is usually the best part of my day. I love being out here. But anyway, hi Josie, say hello. I had someone ask me to do a video about feeding my goats and what I feed my goats and why I feed them what I do. First and foremost, I just want to say I don't feel like I have the whole feeding thing figured out entirely. I am constantly playing with that, constantly tweaking that. That's very much a work in progress. But I can share a lot of things that I have learned, and also just some of the things that you might want to consider if you're getting started with goats. So first and foremost, obviously I'm going to be talking about dairy goats. Different types of goats are different. You're going to feed them differently. But obviously dairy is what I do, so that's what I'm going to be talking about. And one of the things that I just want to mention getting started is there's a lot that goes into good nutrition, and it doesn't just have to do with what you are feeding in their grain feeder or in their hay feeder. People overlook a lot of things like minerals, parasites. Mineral deficiencies and parasite overloads can really tax an animal's system and cause them to not have good nutrition, even if you are feeding them well. So that's something that I feel like really needs to be put into consideration. And also, there is no magic formula. If you feed your goats this special thing, they're going to be amazing and healthy and you're never going to have any issues. That just doesn't exist. It'd be nice if it did. But you know, it is a lot of trial and error. So a couple of things that just need to be laid out kind of as a groundwork for any feeding program is the fact that a long stem forage or fiber needs to be the baseline of every diet plan, regardless of what else you decide to do. So your goats need to be either getting grass, they need to be getting hay, they need to be getting out in the woods and foraging, they need to have some hybrid of all three of those, but they need to be eating forage. They cannot just have a chopped, pelleted feed ration. Goats do extremely well on foods that other animals may not utilize very well, which kind of leads to the whole myth that, you know, goats can eat anything and, you know, the tin can eating Billy sort of idea. But they actually do need decent nutrition. And if you just feed them junk hay all the time, they're probably not going to perform very well for you. Another thing that you need to always keep in mind is that diet for a goat should consist of roughly 2 parts calcium to 1 part phosphorus. And that is total diet, so that will include the calcium and phosphorus found in your hay, in your well water. If you have on a well, you may have a lot of like calcium in your well water, which is what we have here. And then obviously your grain mixes as well. So because I have a lot of calcium in our water supply here, I don't add tons and tons of calcium to their diet. If you get an imbalance of calcium, of your calcium to phosphorus ratio, it can cause a lot of problems with your male goats. Your bucks and wethers can get urinary calculi or urinary stones, and actually too much calcium or too much phosphorus can cause stones, and they will actually block their urinary tract and make them unable to urinate properly, and that will actually kill them eventually if it is not fixed. So that's really important. But also having a good calcium to phosphorus ratio, it's just good for the goat's overall system. Too much calcium, especially in their diet, can create mineral imbalances. It can prevent them from absorbing certain minerals. I think selenium's one that they don't absorb well if they have too much calcium, and there's probably some others as well. So anyway, just kind of keeping that ballpark in mind when you're planning your diet is a good idea, and it's going to save you from a lot of grief and a lot of issues. Now, when my goats are out on the land foraging, I don't stress about the calcium phosphorus ratio, because I trust that they have the sense to figure it out for themselves if given plenty of different food options. So the only time that I really am concerned about it is when I'm feeding them lots of hay in the wintertime, or when I'm feeding them a grain ration. So in general, and this is a very broad generalization, grass hays are going to be higher in phosphorus, and legume hays like clover or alfalfa are going to be high in calcium. And your legume hays are going to be higher in protein as well. So there are a lot of resources available. A lot of them are not necessarily geared specifically towards goats. Many of them are geared more towards cattle producers or horse people. But anyways, you can find a lot of information online just with hay analysis, and how to analyze different types of hay and how to balance feed rations and hay diets and all that kind of stuff. You can also get a hay analysis, because obviously the content of your hay is going to change based on where you're located and what minerals and things are available in your soil where your hay is coming from. So it's not a one-size-fits-all sort of approach. You do kind of have to use some common sense and do some of your own research in that area. So what I like to do as a baseline for my winter feeding for my goats is I like to find a good grass hay. And what kind of grass I use really depends on the year and what has grown well and what I can get, what's available. But Timothy, brome, orchard grass, I'll use any of those. Even a little bit of fescue mixed in here and there is not the end of the world. And then I also like to get a good clover hay, or sometimes you can get hay that has a lot of alfalfa in it, and that works pretty well too. But that's kind of like my supplementary hay that I will give to my milkers. I'll give to my pregnant does. They have higher protein and higher calcium needs. And occasionally the bucks will get a little bit too, if they're on the skinny side. They just look like they need a little something extra. I really don't think that there's any substitute for good hay in your goat's diet, and I am extremely fortunate that I live in a place that gets a good amount of rainfall most summers, and I have reputable people who are my neighbors, who I can buy hay from, and their hay is good and I can trust their quality. And I realize not everyone is able to be in that good of a situation, and so lots of different people come up with different solutions. But if you can get decent hay, buy decent hay. That should be the baseline for your animal's diet. My bucks, when they're fully grown, and if they don't have some kind of an issue that's causing them to not be able to hold their weight well, they only get hay in the winter time. They don't typically need grain, and I usually will just feed them grass hay, unless, like this winter, Alf was getting a little skinny, so I gave him grain for a few months, and then once he got some more weight back on him, I just quit with the grain and started feeding him just the alfalfa with the girls, and I feel like he's doing really well on that. But in general, I find that my bucks don't need a whole lot of extra fancy feeding. Again, if I feed them nice, good quality grass hay. Look at these girls go. They're attacking this multiflora rose bush. Multiflora rose is amazing goat food, and again, this is a forage that probably a lot of other animals are not going to be super excited about, because it is quite thorny, but the goats seem to be able to handle the thorns. And this is a a fairly high protein feed. It's got a lot of calcium in it as well. It's got a lot of vitamin C in it, good for the immune system. And I mean, it's just great goat food. So, you know, this is actually, this is a high quality feed for goats. So I was watching a Greg Judy video recently. He does sheep, and he was talking about how he doesn't ever supplement grain for his sheep because grain grows hoof and horn. And I was like, that's a great way to put it, because that is what grain does. It grows hoofs, it grows horns. Those are not usable products for most people. But I do feed grain because the other thing that grain does is it puts milk in the bucket. Greg Judy, he's doing meat sheep, so milk is not a big deal to him, but it is to me. And I have not figured out a way to avoid feeding grain in my current setup. I would like to get to feeding less grain because I do feel like it's not a very natural feed for them in a lot of ways, and it does grow their hooves. You have to trim hooves a lot more when you're feeding grain. You can founder your goats because it's Josie, you know, she's had issues with her feet because of feeding too much grain, and I'm not sure if it's the protein content or the fat content or what's exactly throwing her off about the grain, but there's something that throws her off and causes her to have issues if she gets too much grain. So I'm not, you know, this huge grain pusher, but I do feel like I have to have it at some level to keep my animals well nourished, because I'm asking a lot of them. I'm asking them to produce a lot of milk, and I feel like they can't quite do that on the hay that we have available all year round. The grain that I feed is not super high quality grain because it's what I can afford. It's from our local feed mill. Here's a mess. It's been blowing around in the wind all day. But it's a 14% protein. Hi, Cleo. It's a 14% protein grain. And the thing I especially like about it is it's balanced. Calcium to phosphorus ratio is balanced in that grain. So I can add that to whatever else I'm feeding, and I know I'm not going to throw their calcium phosphorus ratios off because the grain is a balanced grain. So that's really nice. A lot of people will mix their own grains. I've been experimenting and I've been playing with that some. I just haven't come up with a grain mix that I feel like works better than the pre-mixed stuff that I can get from the feed mill, and so far at least I haven't been able to find anything that's any cheaper than what I can get from the feed mill, so I'm kind of sticking with the pre-mixed stuff for the moment. A lot of people also that go grain-free, they feed lots of alfalfa pellets, and that's how they get the extra protein for their goats. I am reluctant to do that for a couple of reasons. One of them is because we have a lot of calcium in our well water, and I have to be actually careful about not feeding too much alfalfa hay, or I will start to throw their calcium to phosphorus ratios off in their diet. I have a free choice mineral system, which I will talk about in another video, and it has free choice calcium and free choice phosphorus as a part of that mineral system. And it was really interesting. I've been feeding that for over a year now, and last winter when I started feeding alfalfa, my goats started eating lots of phosphorus out of the mineral system, and I realized I was feeding too much calcium, and so I've actually backed way off on the amount of alfalfa that I feed right now. For this herd of 4 pregnant does in Alfred, the used to be skinny buck, I'm feeding them 3 flakes of alfalfa a day, and that seems to be a good balance because they're not eating a lot of phosphorus from the mineral system, and they look good, their weight's good, I feel like they're holding condition really well and looking very healthy. But if I go much above 3 flakes of alfalfa a day, their levels are gonna get thrown off. The other reason I don't do a lot of alfalfa pellets is because they're expensive. They're more expensive than the grain that I buy. And my goats don't really like them that much, and I'm not sure if they don't like them because they know that it's messing up their calcium to phosphorus ratios, or if there's a flavor in them that they don't like. I think some alfalfa, obviously if you get organic it's not going to be, but some alfalfa has a lot of glyphosates in it. And so maybe they're tasting the glyphosates and they don't like that flavor. I don't really know, but they're just not enthusiastic alfalfa pellet eaters. And I've also found, so I've done, you know, the alfalfa hay and then I've done the alfalfa pellets. They perform way better on the alfalfa hay than they do on the pellets. I just find, you know, if I've had them on alfalfa pellets, and when I start feeding the alfalfa hay, milk production almost always goes up. So there's definitely something to be said for just feeding alfalfa hay instead of pellets. Again, if you can't get hay, pellets are better than nothing. But I do think that, at least for me, the hay is much better. For me, what I'm currently feeding my goats, and again, I'm looking for ways to tweak this. I'm specifically looking for ways to get more of the grain out of their diet. But in the winter time, I feed a grass hay as a baseline. I supplement with alfalfa as needed. And then I will also give my 14% protein, Cal-Phos ratio balanced grain for my local feed mill. Again, kind of on an as needed basis. So things to look at if you are just getting started out with goats and you have no idea what to feed them. Number one is find someone in your area who's doing goats the way that you think you want to do them, and get some ideas from them on what they feed. You may not end up sticking with their exact feeding program, but it's helpful to kind of gather some data and have something to go off of. Another thing to do is to get your water tested and figure out if you've got a really heavy mineral load in your water or if you've got a lot of calcium in your water. You've got to find a good hay supplier. And I like to make sure that all of my hay is bought in before winter starts, especially if it's a dry year. People will wait till the last minute and then they're scrambling for hay and they can't find it anywhere. And oh man, I just hate doing that. It's the worst. So good girls. Are you ready to go home? Are you ready to go home? Okay, come on. So yeah, if you can, buy up hay and store it. I highly recommend that you do that. It will save you so much stress later on. And then if you are going to feed grain, I would highly recommend that you buy a grain, at least starting out with, that has balanced calcium to phosphorus ratios, so you just don't have to go through all sorts of mental gymnastics to try to balance everything out in their diet. And if you can, get your goats out on the land. Get them out, get them grazing, get them browsing, get them out in the woods. I mean, they're gonna find food out there that's way healthier, and just way more in line with what their natural diet would ordinarily be. And it's also just so much of a healthier lifestyle for them. They're up, they're moving, they're climbing, they're active. You know, it's way better for them to be out in the woods than sitting in front of a hay feeder all day long, you know, stationary. So yeah, get them out, get them moving, get them foraging on the land. It'll be better for them in the long run, the more that they do that. Also, breed for the genetics that you want to keep in your herd. You know, I am working towards goats that will do better on the land and on the hay that I can get and don't need as much grain to be able to keep their weight on and produce a good amount of milk. And I'm actually going to do at some point another video about herd goals as well, and just what I'm selecting for and what I'm looking for in the goats that I'm breeding. But yeah, I mean, you may have to start out with some goats that are not exactly what you want, but you don't have to stay there, and you can, you know, breed towards goats that use the resources that you have available, and are easy to manage. I would highly recommend, if you're starting out, look for somebody in your area who's doing things the way that you think you might want to do them. and that is managing their goats the way you envision yourself managing them. Does that feel good? Do you like that? And buy from them. You're gonna save yourself so much time and headache and stress buying animals that are already suited to the lifestyle and the management that you can provide. I realize that's not an option for everyone. That wasn't really an option for me starting out, and so I'm kind of moving forward on my own here, breeding towards what I want. But you know, if you do have the option to buy from someone who's managing their animals the way you think you want to manage yours, I would say go for it. Even if you have to pay a little extra, I really do think it's worth it in the long run. So thanks for watching, and I hope this video is helpful, and I'll see you guys next time.